Cokes. I'm on a lot of sugar and caffeine right now. So.
Yeah. All right,
Same.
Welcome everybody to Brookline Booksmith's author event series. My name is Alex. I'm the events director here at the store, well, for a few more weeks, but I'm happy to be going out this way. I'm so pleased to have all of you here. Thank you for supporting two wonderful writers and your local independent bookstore. We've been part of this community since 1961, and that's thanks to readers like you who come through our doors, buy our books. Thank you to everyone who bought tickets when you didn't have to pay, and who come here to celebrate reading with us. We could not be here without you. Today we welcome back Paul Tremblay along with his new short story collection, The Beast You Are. Paul has launched his books with us before, many times, and to our great delight. He's also moderated many of our events with other authors, and in every role he brings friends. So today I'm so pleased that the author sharing the stage is debut novelist Clémence Michallon, author of The Quiet Tenant. Paul has won the Bram Stoker British Fantasy and Massachusetts Book Awards and is the author of The Pallbearers Club, Survivor Song, Growing Things and Other Stories, The Cabin at the End of the World, Disappearance at Devil's Rock, A Head Full of Ghosts, and the crime novels The Little Sleep and No Sleep Till Wonderland. He lives outside Boston with his family, and we're always happy to have him visit. The Beast You Are collects the title novella with 14 stories, and while each small act of horror stands on its own, the stories play together as a carefully compiled album of discomfort, originality, and unease, the clever and the terrible. Inventive and versatile, these stories take on many forms. From blog post to poetry, they weave together the impossible and the far too familiar. Clémence Michallon was born and raised near Paris. She studied journalism at City University of London, received a master's in journalism from Columbia University, and has written for The Independent since 2018. Her essays and features have covered true crime, celebrity culture, and literature. She moved to New York City in 2014 and recently became a US citizen. She now divides her time between New York City and Rhinebeck, New York. The Quiet Tenant, her debut thriller, though not her debut book, places a killer, his victim, and his daughter under the same uneasy roof. Focused on three female perspectives instead of the inner voice of the murderer, this novel has received abundant advance praise as a tight, fast-paced game of wits from which it's impossible to look away. It's truly a pleasure to have these two authors here to discuss their books today, so please welcome Paul Tremblay and Clémence Michallon.
You should have on your bio that you've got your driver's license in Manhattan in 2021.
Yes, that's true. That is also something that happened. I told you, the book happened and I was drunk with the power of my own confidence, and I decided to learn how to drive. Yeah.
And you passed.
And I passed, first try. Paul,
Yes,
I just wanted to open by saying congratulations on this fantastic book, which I had the pleasure of reading a few months ago now. And as a fan of yours, I really appreciated the way it showcases the breadth of your skill and the range of your talent as a writer. And I wanted to ask you, okay, so the scientific community is divided as to how many books you've written. But on your website, this is your 9th book. Your 10th is already well on its way. In the timeless words of Bob Dylan, how does it feel?
That's a hard question. It's weird because, I don't know, at some point, like, you always feel like you're the new person, you're the new writer. And then it's like you blink your eyes. If you're fortunate and privileged enough, it's like, oh, I guess I'm not the new person anymore, which kind of sucks. I like being the new person.
But look, you have all your.
But no, I mean, yeah, I mean, readers are been wonderful. I'm addicted to, frankly, like, writing is hard, and I'm usually beating myself up. The part I'm addicted to is having a thing finished and wanting it to share with people, and then when people tell me good things about me. I guess what I'm trying to admit is that my self-esteem is way too reliant on you people, but thank you. Well, let me ask you briefly first, congratulations to you on your first English novel, The Quiet Tenant, which is amazing. I did also read it, a while ago before it got published, and congratulations for it being an instant national bestseller.
Thank you very much.
Like, instant. Like, what does that mean? Like, the moment it came out,
First
instant.
week of sales. First week, which
I'm just jealous.
Did you?
It was a good Good Morning America, right?
Yes.
Feature. Wow.
Yeah.
Did you actually go on, or now they?
No, we pre-recorded a 30-second bit, and we did a first thing, and then they were like, "Could you reshoot it?"
Oh no.
And so we went back upstate. I say it was me, my husband, and then his mom also stepped in because we needed someone to hold what we were using as a light reflector. It was like a kitchen tray that was gold, so it was very homemade, very homemade.
All right. Well, let me ask. So the novel, I'm curious as to, and I don't want to like spoil stuff because I think part of the joy of the book is sort of discovering, any of the surprises. I don't want to say twists because I wouldn't really call it like a twisty book necessarily, but it's really character based. But anyway, so what's the kernel of this? I mean, it's really a story that features a serial killer, but I don't know if I would call it a serial killer novel. But anyway.
That's interesting. Yeah, the way it started was, as all great things do, when I started spending more time with my in-laws.
So they're serial killers? Is that what you're saying?
Listen, everyone's a serial killer until proven otherwise. It was April of 2020, which was a really strange time, and we were all in a house upstate together. Me, my husband, and his parents. And suddenly we were spending every hour of every day in the same place. And we really got to see how we all spent our time. And I started thinking, what if someone had a really dark secret that they had been able to keep because of the distance that is sort of baked into our schedules and routines? And what if suddenly that distance was threatened? And there's no pandemic in the book. I got rid of that element, but I played with that idea, and that's how I ended up writing about a serial killer, but through the people around him. So the people who he's keeping that secret from.
Right.
That was the kernel of it. Now, if I may ask you a question,
Sure.
in this game of tennis,
Yeah.
and there's no elegant way to segue, but this is not your first collection of short fiction. So it has a novella in free verse that is an original piece, and then the other pieces were published in other places before, and they go as far back as 2013, which I'm told was 10 years ago. Do you feel that you stretch different muscles as a writer when you sit down to write short fiction as opposed to a novel? And do these two parts of your brain communicate, or is it a different Paul?
Wow, good questions.
Thanks.
Short fiction is definitely a different skill, a different writing muscle. When I first started writing, it was almost exclusively short stories. That's kind of how I felt like how I learned the basics of writing. Well, insofar as I know any basics of writing. And I felt like I had to start over again with novels. So I've actually, although I guess I've written a bunch, I've been less confident with short stories after being in novels for so long, just because I've been thinking, it's really been like a novel a year since 2015 almost. So that part of it's exciting. It's like, I haven't done a short story. I've only done like one short story this year or something like that. So there's definitely an attraction to it in that sense. And I like the idea, so like a novel, it's this big expansive thing, even if it's a short novel where like the short story, you really get to sort of like have like a laser focus on maybe even a scene or a particular moment. And the challenge is how do you make that sort of feel expansive? I don't necessarily think about that every time I'm sitting down to write a short story, but those are the things afterwards that I notice about my favorite short stories, and hopefully some of mine have the same effect. No idea where the free verse animal novella came from.
Oh, we'll talk more about that. We will solve that question together.
Sure. So you mentioned, so we'll spin back to the novel. You mentioned, this the serial killer Aiden. You're never inside of his head in your book. It's you only learn about Aiden through really three main women characters. And I guess I wanted to ask, what was the challenges of the Aiden part of the story? Next time we'll talk about the specific women in the novel. But I was curious how, did you know right off the bat you were going to hop inside Aiden's head? There was always going to be just the other people in his life that are you're learning from.
Yeah. When I decided to write a story about a serial killer, I knew from the get-go that he wouldn't get to speak. I think for two reasons, one silly, one serious. The slightly silly one is that if you've consumed true crime or I don't know, spent hours of your time watching interrogation tapes on the FBI's YouTube channel, which you can do for free. Serial killers are really boring. They talk in circles, they equivocate, they don't want to talk about what you want to talk about, they don't want to reveal anything. It's interesting, but in very short bursts, and so it showed me that I think they lie often to other people, they lie to themselves, they have weird pockets of shame that keeps them from fully inspecting what they're doing and the reasons why they do them. And so that was part of the reason. And then the more serious reason is that, again, as a consumer of true crime, I saw a movement where we were sort of shifting our attention away from perpetrators and back towards victims and the people around those perpetrators, their relatives, their friends, the people who knew them before their crimes were revealed. And, you know, if I was going to be, I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to be a crime novelist, I'd like to try to think about crime in this kind of way, viewing the sort of the whole picture of how those things happen in the world, instead of focusing really on the perceived mental experience of the perpetrators, because I don't know, it seemed almost like I like a campy serial killer character as much as the next person, but I think if we try to think about them that way in real life, it almost gives them more power. Like, if, oh, they're so cunning and they're a little otherworldly, it's like, no, they're just people making their weird maladaptive way around the world. So that came that way. Now, speaking of how ideas come together in our minds and the decisions we have to make, how did you end up writing a novella with anthropomorphic animals? And also, how did your team react when you said an anthropomorphic novella?
Oh, I have many answers to this. So the
really
first
break
part,
it down.
yeah. So I love Watership Down. Like, to me, it's like a formative piece of art for me. I was a super scaredy cat as a child, like scared of everything. I would watch it, but it would terrify me. But for some reason, when I did see the movie, I saw the movie before I read the book, and I saw the movie. My father took me to the Cabot Cinema Theaters, you know, really cool theater in Beverly, and they were showing a double bill of Lord of the Rings. Who's the director of that cartoon? Yeah. See, I knew you knew. And then, you know, and then Watership Down. I knew nothing about Watership Down. Like, my hook was Lord of the Rings. Oh, I love The Hobbit. We had The Hobbit sort of record at home and stuff like that. So Lord of the Rings was actually a little disappointing because it, you know, it doesn't do the whole story. It just sort of like ends, as, you know, from the kid's point of view. But then Watership Down just blew my mind. Like, I should have been terrified. Like when I had my 8-year-old son watch it, and he was just bawling. It's like, don't worry, Bigwig's still alive. I didn't have that reaction, right? I usually am so terrified of everything. I'm not quite sure why. I think maybe at the time, I was probably like 11 or 12. It felt like I was being shown like an honest adult thing for maybe the first time, at least in terms of like politics and stuff like that. You know, so in the 80s, there was also The Secrets of NIMH, which played on HBO all the time, you know, so I watched that, and then, you know, I love Animal Farm. So I've always had this want to write an anthropomorphic animal story. I think every writer is gonna write one, right? That's sort of like the law. You have, if you're around long enough, you have to write an animal story. And I had this vague idea of the novella, but as a novel. But I knew, it's like one of the few times I've ever thought about the marketplace and my publishers, like there's no way they'll ever let me do an animal novel, and in free verse. Partly inspired by Toby Barlow's Sharp Teeth, which is an amazing novel, published in like 2008. LA Werewolves, free verse. It's brilliant. You should read it if you haven't read it. So this is like the one time I had a story waiting for me. Like, I usually work from story to story. I wish I had like a million stories waiting. I just usually go from one to one. I've already made this way too long. But so the story was there, but when I was off deal after Survivor Song, I still wanted to work with William Morrow and my editor too. So I pitched them the Pall Bearers Club in like halfway through 2020, and they said, yeah, great. And I hoped they would offer a 2-novel deal. They said, okay, so we want Pall Bearers Club, we want another novel, but we also want another collection. I was like, you do? I wasn't ready for that. Like, I don't have enough stories. But in the back of my head, I was like, oh, this is how I can do the animal story. I'll do it as a novella. That'll be the big original part of this collection. And I never told them. I did the don't ask for permission, just do it and say sorry afterwards. So I don't know if that's good advice or not. But that's what I did. When I turned in the collection, I was like, yeah, the big, she's like, did you write any short stories for it? I'm like, well, I wrote this big novella. And at one point, my editor is like the best person in the world. She saved my career. She's this cool, older than me, New York City, no bullshit kind of person. And at one point when it came, there really didn't have to be very many edits because most of the stories were previously published. But she said to me, "It's like, yeah, I don't know what to do with this, so." So there's no edits. Luckily
Wait, really?
Yeah, luckily the copy editor was someone who had studied folklore, so I leaned on the copy editor a little bit more.
Oh, can you talk about that a little bit? What was that like? Your work with a copy editor and
Yeah.
you know their background in folklore.
There's no like real story edits. I mean, she was like,
No.
"Yeah, you did a good job." I mean, there was tons of like copy edit stuff, which was great. Like I had no idea what to do with the punctuation. It's like, well, whatever you do, it should be consistent. So we went back and forth on that. But yeah, so then that's where the novella came from.
What was it? Okay, I have two questions.
Sure.
What was it like suddenly writing in verse, albeit the freest form of verse? But what was it like writing in verse? And also, did you ever did you ever have a character grab something with their hand and then you were like, no, like they're a dog?
Well, they're definitely anthropomorphized, so like they can grab things, but I don't describe the mechanisms of a paw wrapping around a spoon or something. I mean, but they're wearing clothes, they're doing people
Yeah.
things, you know, horses, etc. All of them.
That's true.
There was I am one thing embarrassed. Both me and the copy editor missed someone online. Like, why do you do this, people? Don't do this. Don't be this person online.
It's too
It said,
late.
like, you know, I made a reference. I thought it was a really cool poetic line about like the horse. His shoed, because he's wearing horseshoes on two of his feet, he's walking this way. His shoed feet gabbling the stage or something. And someone online was like, shouldn't it be, I'm already gonna forget, shodden, or what do you say when you shoe the horse's foot? Shod? Yeah, shouldn't it be shod your feet? Like, probably. Artistic license.
I did not notice. I don't know that word.
But no, I mean, I was nervous, but I was also really excited because it was a new thing to do. And honestly, I never describe writing as fun. I mean, I'm addicted to, I mean, sometimes it is, but most of the time I'm just like beating myself up and just like thinking about all the gears and just obsessed with the story. I guess that's a form of fun, but not like writing laugh out loud fun.
No.
But that happened during the novella. It was the most fun I've ever had writing.
Really?
So I'd say it was easy. I mean, it went pretty slow. But there were moments where I felt like my good friend Laird Barron, because he talks about cackling out loud sometimes, when you can't believe what he did on the page. Like, I was laughing at myself a few times while writing this. It was fun. I don't know, hopefully, you know, it's still like a dark, weird, twisted story, but hopefully some of the fun comes through.
It is. I had a good time reading it. I gotta tell you.
Yeah. Speaking of fun.
Yes.
this is
Serial
not a good
killers.
segue.
He's not a dog.
Yeah, so your first novel that you've written in English, I want to talk about the challenges of writing in a second language, because it's brilliantly written. I think you probably understand English grammar better than I do. Like, I'm curious, like, when you were writing, like, do you think in French and English, or do you think in English, and then it was just, anyway, so you can
No,
answer that question.
I think in English. I don't think about, like, I don't think of a sentence in French and then translate it. It does come out in English. I did have to work to find the voice of this novel in English. I had finished a novel-length work before in English. I hesitate to call it a novel, but it was a long piece of writing. So this wasn't my first time trying to write a long thing in English, but I did have to play with it a little bit to find the voice, but I don't know that it was that different from the work even a native speaker would have had to do. You know, I think like you always fiddle with a piece of writing when you start something new to find its voice. There is a thing where I'm a little bit paranoid that words don't mean what I think they do, and sometimes they don't. To me, saunter will always sound like it means the exact opposite of what it means, and that was a word that was misused. Like, it's not in there anymore, because I checked.
What did you think saunter meant?
Like skipping?
Ah.
But that's not what it means. It means walk
Yeah.
slowly, right?
Skipping and like snapping your fingers.
Yeah,
side
it's
by
like-
side.
yeah. I thought it meant like walking joyfully, like you're sauntering.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it should.
It's like it's
Yeah.
yeah. I think so. That's a weird word, I think. But so aside from saunter problems, I do have like some then residual insecurity. Like if someone is like, "What the hell is this sentence?" I'm like, "I don't know. What is it? I have no idea what I'm doing." But overall, I mean, I think every writer, you know, we all need our copy editors. We all need our editors. So I always remind myself, like, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough. And I find English really good as a language. It's very convenient. It's very well structured. It's very economical. I'm a word count girl. Like when I'm writing, I try to do 500 words when I'm writing in English. If I'm writing in French, it's 1,000 because it takes so long to say anything. So I had to reduce the daily word count when I started writing in English because you just say things in fewer words. And yeah, so I love English. I think it's a beautiful language. I love writing in English.
Wow. I wasn't expecting that.
That's right.
Is this being translated from French?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, but I'm
That's
not
kind of strange, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I mean,
it's-
it's strange, like, someone else is gonna translate, like, you could probably do it, but.
Yeah, it's my translator sent me a sample chapter to see if I agreed with her, you know.
You spit on it too.
No, I was like, damn, I wish I could write like that in French. The French translation of my book is like much better than how I write in French. So I'm a little jealous of my translator, I guess.
Amazing.
But yeah,
I don't know any other languages.
Well-
I barely know English and math.
wait.
And math's sort of like another language.
First of all, yes.
Yeah.
You know a bit of French, because there's
There's
that hilarious scene in the Pallbearers Club, Le Mangeur Difficile,
yeah.
which was very funny. Yeah, it was good times.
I took a bunch of years of high school. I went to public high school. A bunch of years of French, but then it started getting too hard. So I switched to beginning Latin for like my junior and senior year. But then when I went to college, I had to take a language. Beginning French, hey!
Hey!
But that honestly, I'm mad at the younger me. Like a life regret I have is that I don't know another language. I still could probably learn one. We'll see.
Everyone who speaks another language ends up learning English. So in a way, you're fine.
All right.
8 years of Latin, by the way.
8 years.
If you had told me that I would brag about this at a book event one day, it was all worth it. Paul, we've talked about the titular piece, The Beast You Are, but there are a few others in this book that I have some questions about.
Okay.
In the first short story in this collection, Haunted House Tour, One Per Person, a narrator whose first name is also Paul tells another character, quote, "I wonder why I always fear so instantly in those dark spaces." The narrator says it in reference to a specific drawing that he's looking at in the story, but that struck me as an interesting observation for a horror writer. Paul, why do you always fear so instantly in those dark spaces?
It's so, I mean, I think it sort of goes back to like, you know, the sort of the questions like, why do you like horror? You know, and then there's two sides of me. It's like the flippant side of me is like, why don't you like horror? Like, and I mean that because so many people are like,
Yeah.
oh, I couldn't possibly, you know, like I've had the opportunity to go to a bunch of like more straight literary festivals where you're sort of the genre horror person. And one of my favorite conversations was the poet who won the LA Times book prize for poetry, you know, big award. And I was on the van back, or from the hotel to the festival, and hey, congratulations. I said, congratulations on the poetry prize. And she said, oh yeah, we talked, thank you. She's like, oh, what do you write? And in my head, I'm like, oh, good. And I hadn't written this poem yet, so I was like, I even tried to couch it like I write literary horror. And she literally laughed and then turned and started talking to somebody else. I'm like, come on, you're a poet.
Oh my God!
I'm joking. So anyway, there's sort of like the angry punk reaction to like horror sometimes for non-horror folks. But because for me, it's like as long as I can remember, I've always been interested and terrified of and by horror stuff. So, as an adult, I guess more specific to your question, I think, for me, there's like two parts of it. There's the kid fun horror, like the wonder, like the sense of awe. Like, I mean, that's still there too for the adults, but the sense of awe, like even though things aren't going to go well, you've had this weird privilege to experience this. I'm talking, in terms of the characters in the book. And there's that like sense of possibility too, still in horror. Like, as terrified as I would be if something was actually haunted, I don't necessarily believe in it 95% of the time. But there's that, what if it is? Or wouldn't that be cool? And then you'd be shit scared. So there's that part of like the wonder, the awe, the possibility of horror, mixed with my more adult fears, which deal with, answering like the toughest questions of all art that AI will never be able to answer. Like,
Yes.
What does it feel like to go through this? What decisions are you going to make? How do you live through this? How does anybody live through this? So to me, those are the parts that almost every story idea I come up with is a mash of that. Even if it ends up being like a weird comedy, there's still that, I think, like a horror element to it. Yeah. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. Well, I asked because I wrote a serial killer book that has like a true crime event to it. Yeah. People always go like, why do you think we care? And I'm like, how could we not? He's a serial killer, and then he goes home and he makes dinner. And it's kind of similar to what you said, I think, in terms of, like, why not? How can you not care? How can you
Sure,
not
and that part of your book, too, is, I think, was why I'm very much interested in horror, and something like Shirley Jackson did it the best. It's like the intrusion of that strangeness or that horror upon the mundane, and then how the mundane sort of either adapts or reacts or, finds out, what it is that's happening.
Yeah. Hey, since you mentioned Shirley Jackson, see, sometimes I don't speak English.
Miss Jackson, if you're nasty.
Miss Jackson. Thank you.
Sorry.
There's a short story in this collection called The Party, and you wrote it for an anthology that was inspired, that was all Shirley Jackson inspired stories. And there's this idea of an uncertain apocalypse in it, right? Like people are at a party, and it's maybe the last party ever, but we don't know. And of course that reminded, first of all, right after I read it, I walked past a party city that was like closing, so they were like, everything must go. And I was like, that's where you'd go for this party. But that reminded me, of course, of The Cabin at the End of the World, this idea of, is the world ending? Is it? Is it not? Is this a theme that you have, that you like come back to sometimes, or was it just fortuitous?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. A few things specific to that story, but yeah, a lot of my short fiction, and I guess The Cabin at the End was really the only one that had like the hovering of the apocalypse. But I had a out-of-print short story collection called In the Meantime, which came out in 2010, where a lot of the stories were dealing with either pre-apocalypses or during the apocalypse. I don't know, it's just as a child of the 80s, who grew up like fearing nuclear war was imminent at any point. That was the transition from like the fun, scared of monsters into a teenager when I was scared of being a teenager, and then obviously whatever was happening. And the rest of the world, that was all of those are beyond my control, but especially that part of it. Yeah, so my brain keeps sort of coming back to that.
That makes sense.
But specific to The Party, that was a story that I had like the bones, but for a while. But I sort of put it away, but I never forgot like that part of or that maybe story. But when that opportunity came up, I was like, oh, I want to do the story because I want to riff on two of my favorite Jackson works that are probably lesser known. I think everyone knows The Lottery and The Haunting of Hill House, but one of my favorite novels of her is The Sundial, which if you haven't read The Sundial, it's amazing. It's funny, it's weird. It's like this aristocratic family, or sort of basically some of them are deciding to hole up because they think the world's ending tomorrow. It's just really bitingly funny. I think it's very today too. Like, it's amazing that she didn't write it today, that she wrote it when she wrote it. And then she has a short story called Intoxicated, which is only like 2,800 words. And again, it takes place at a party, and this really drunk, awful older man comes to the kitchen, and the 14-year-old daughter who lives there, and he's totally dismissive of her, very sexist. And she's just like super chill and super calm and starts detailing, what's going to happen when everything ends. It's just such a creepy, funny short story. So The Party sort of, takes both of those and sort of smushes them together a little bit.
Very interesting.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, so let's pivot to The Quiet Tenant and talk about maybe the three main women of the story, Cecilia, Rachel, and Emily. And actually, I want to ask specifically about Cecilia, because I was really drawn to her and her relationship and how you handle it, because she's the daughter of the serial killer. And so I don't want to, again, get too spoilery, but if you want to talk about it, Cecilia, maybe how you came up with her, if she was there like early on, or.
Yeah, so I love her. She's one of the three main narrators of the Quiet Tenant, and she's the serial killer's daughter, who obviously doesn't know that her dad is a serial killer. And she was in the story from the beginning. I was always intrigued by this idea that there would be a surviving captive victim that would somehow end up in contact with her captor's daughter, and the idea that he wouldn't foresee that they might bond and that it might sort of play against him, that he might underestimate both of them. That was very intriguing. That was there from the get-go. The daughter wasn't going to be a narrator at first, because I started writing this as a like one perspective, the captive victim, and then I added more. There were two challenges in building the daughter. The first was to find her voice. Teenage daughter is a tough voice, I think, to nail. I really wanted to do right by her, and I used to be a teenage girl, so it shouldn't have been that hard. I wrote a diary and stuff, it should have been okay, but I don't know, there's a way that, you know how when you write dialogue that sounds natural isn't actually how people speak, and in order for dialogue to actually sound natural, you have to remove all the hey, hi, and I think there's a similar thing when you're trying to write teenage girl. You can't actually write it like a teenage girl would, but it can't sound like an adult either. So I reread a French novel called Bonjour Tristesse, which means Hello Sadness, which is the Frenchest title. And it's narrated by a teenage girl who spends a summer on at a beach town with her dad and his two girlfriends, the old one, the new one, and it is a French book. And there's that, she has this beautiful voice in it. The daughter is the narrator of that entire novel, and she has that voice that is both juvenile but also sort of, I think she's the only character who really understands everything that's going on, and she can see things but can't really solve them, or intuit them but not really put them into words, so that really helped. And then the big part that I had to figure out was the relationship between father and daughter. I've always been fascinated by children of impossible fathers, or just with dads that are very present. I always thought, if my father was Bob Dylan, I would not try to be a musician, but you do your thing, Jacob Dylan, whatever. And he's very good. I would never criticize any member of the Dylan family, but I always wondered, how do you construct yourself when your dad is, either a serial killer or a musician, I guess. And I think there was a dynamic of control, but also you can never control your kids 100%, I think. I don't have them, but I used to be one. And so there was this idea of there would be love there, but obviously a lot of secrets, a lot of toxic dynamics, and it ended up sort of crystallizing a lot of things that I think are true of families, which is that it's complicated. And that's what I have to say on it.
See that camera over there? Jacob just hit thumbs down on the YouTube channel.
Yeah. What were we talking about? Yeah, daughter, serial killers, French books, I don't know. Am I wrong? I think actually I'm not wrong, because I was listening to a podcast interview you did when I was walking to this tonight, and you confirmed something that I thought. Are there shades of the Pallbearers Club in Haunted House Tour, which was first published in 2019?
Yeah, sort of in retrospect, it was a little bit of practice with having a really autobiographical character, especially the teen's life. And it wasn't necessarily on purpose, it was the story idea that I had. Although I will say, as I'm getting older, begrudgingly, well, I should say begrudgingly, it's better than the alternative. One of my favorite writers and people is Jeffrey Ford. If you've never read Jeffrey Ford, pick up anything that he's written. But as he's gotten older, he's done this whole series of short stories where he and his wife are the main characters. And it's just so sweet and funny, the way he projects their dialogue. And Jeffrey in particular. because Jeff writes this really beautiful prose. If you see Jeff, he looks like a Jersey longshoreman. And he talks like one too. He's got this really thick Jersey accent. Like getting to hear him read fiction is amazing. So anyway, like almost all of my stories start like from the place of being a fan of like, ooh, this thing really excites me. I want to try something like this. And that's sort of like where some stories really start from. So that story started with, well, I want to be like Jeff a little bit, but the title of the story is Ice Cold Lemonade is crossed out. It says Haunted House Tours after that.
Yeah, sorry, I abbreviated.
Yeah, so it was when my daughter was super young. It felt like every other day she was out at the end of the driveway, hawking lemonade to people. Which is fun. And, she would have friends do it with her. But like as a parent, you couldn't help but freak out. Like, who are these weirdos stopping to get lemonade? And then like tomorrow I was like, oh, what if she started selling something else? Like bringing people into the house. I'm like, oh, that's a cool idea. Like, kid decides to not sell lemonade, but take people into their house and call it a haunted house and do a haunted house tour. The piece of art that's in that story is something that that Emma, my daughter, drew when she was 12 years old. So she's very upset at me now that she's not 12 years old because that piece of art doesn't represent the artist that she's become.
How are we doing on time?
Yeah, I mean...
We can sit here for hours, but...
Well, maybe, do you have like one burning question? Otherwise I have the lightning round that we have to do for you.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
I'm sure oh yes, I do have a burning question. Not to jump the shark, because your new book just came out,
Yeah.
but I do believe you have a novel coming up. Would you like to tell us anything about it?
Sure, so I just got the edits, so hopefully it'll be up next summer. It's going to be called Horror Movie, a Novel. What a great
What an
title,
interesting
right?
title. Why did you call it that?
It's funny, there seems to be like a spate of like horror books that are coming out with these last couple of years, like Sylvia Maria Garcia's got one coming out this summer. Joshua Winning just had one just come out now, dealing with horror movies and horror fiction. So, hopefully mine, has a little bit of a unique twist to it because I include the entire screenplay of this movie that never made it to screen in 1993. So, I'm pretty happy with it. It's sort of presented as like a audio book that's being read by this person who played like the quote-unquote villain in a movie, inspired by Gunnar Hansen's amazing Chainsaw Confidential. Whether or not you're a Texas Chainsaw Massacre fan, you should be, but you should read the audio. He reads it, and he wrote it. It's really wonderfully written. So anyway, but there is also, I will say, there is definitely a lot of my Hollywood experience blended and refracted, and maybe a little bit exaggerated, but not as much as it could be, like in the story too.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, so we'll see. Thanks. How about so before the lightning round? Then how about yourself? Are you working on a novel?
You know what I did? Before this came out June 20th, June 19th, 11 p.m. I sent something new to our mutual agent, who's probably watching us. Hi, Stephen. And 10 hours later, I broke my laptop irreparably. It was like done. The same laptop that I wrote this book on. So yeah, I did finish something. It's also a psychological thriller. And what I will say is this is set upstate New York in the winter. It's very dreary. There's a lot of snow. I don't know if that's what dreary means. But it's just like, it's cold and it's, just a house, a very simple house. And I wanted to go somewhere nice and warm. So I went to a beautiful hotel in the desert in Utah for this new project.
Okay, so before we take questions from everybody over here, the lightning round, so it has to be quick answers. In the tradition, since I'm always taking things from other people, I'm obviously stealing this from Jamie Lipton's in the actor's studio. Tremblay is French, so we're gonna have some French questions here.
Okay.
Favorite cheese?
Cheddar. Yeah. Okay, sorry. I had like
goat cheddar? No.
a smoked cheddar.
I said a goat cheddar?
No, like
okay.
I had a really long discussion with my husband and a friend of ours, Nathan, about what the best cheese is, and we agreed that cheddar is like, everyone kind of likes it. So it's probably like the most, if you serve cheddar, you're gonna make the most people happy.
Okay. It's lightning round, remember. I'm just kidding. And your answer is wrong, it's Broadbender. No, anyone? Favorite wine? I know nothing about wine, so I won't say anything to this one.
Gewürztraminer. Gewürztraminer.
Anybody?
It's from Alsace. Yeah, thank you. I don't speak German. It's from Alsace. It's very good. It's very, very good.
your favorite French waiter in fiction or a movie or anything.
Okay, so he's not really French, but you know in Sherlock season whatever it was that he came back from the dead, when he passes off as a French waiter and someone's nodding, he like draws a mustache and he like sort of grumbles in French tones. That one.
Wrong.
What?
The
Who
answer
was
is
it?
clearly the French waiter from the Simpsons episode. Where Mayor Quimby's son is like, say chowder.
I've never watched.
Chowder.
And you said you
I
didn't
know,
speak
I know.
French. I've never watched The Simpsons.
That's okay. Clémence is a marathoner. She's run marathons. So I want to know, what is the hardest mile of a marathon?
14.
You can expand. Why?
Yeah. Oh,
With your
suddenly.
permission. I know, sorry.
Because you run a half, so you're tired, but you're so not near the end. You still have another half to go. It's also usually in the middle of the course is where there are the fewest people cheering. So you're tired, and it's not almost over. So 14.
All right.
But also 24 is pretty bad. Because you're almost done, but the last 2.6 miles really just are never ending. Usually I'm crying.
All right. I think this is an easy one. The Cabin at the End of the World or Knock at the Cabin?
The book was better.
All right, last one. Whoa. So you mentioned we do share an agent, Stephen Barber. He's the
Yes.
best. Who do you think his favorite client is?
It's so you.
All right. That's enough of that torture. Okay, any questions?
Oh, yes.
Anywhere? Anybody?
Come on.
Paul, I recently listened to, because I'm not able to sit down and read, Head Full of Ghosts, and I'm really curious to hear how you found Mary's voice, because I felt like she was a really effective young female narrator, and male authors rarely do a good job of that.
Well, thank you. So, like, I would say 8-year-old Mary's behavior, my daughter, who's in the audience, was 8 when I was writing the book in 2013. And so, like, a lot of her, went into Mary. In terms of, like, how she acted as an 8-year-old. So much so, it still upsets my wife. You can see the steam coming out of her head right now. Yeah, but thank you. I honestly don't know, like, how to answer that question otherwise, but, like, I really appreciate it. I think, obviously I'm not an 8-year-old girl or a 25-year-old woman writing about what they were like when they were 8, etc. So, like, whenever I'm writing about someone who's not me or doesn't have my experience, my sort of guidepost, to me, the third rail is I'm not writing about I'm not writing about their culture. I'm not writing about necessarily what it means to feel like to be a woman or a young woman. But I feel like I can still write about them as a character, and then my hope is that the reader will bring their own experience to fill in any sort of holes. I mean, that's sort of like the trust part of writing that, I don't know, that it's hard to get to. To know, like, because I can't describe how to do it other than say, like, that's, I hope, is what happens. Like, if it's not me, there's still room for the reader to bring in their experience to the character. How was that for an answer? Wow.
That makes a lot of sense. That was a
Yeah.
good question. I'm glad you asked it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Let's go with Mike.
I have a question for Clémence.
Yes.
English was not a house third language. English was just Congress third language. Did you subconsciously or consciously look at any writers in English for whom English was not their native language to get the resonances and cadences that we use?
Oh, that's such a good question. I absorbed, I think, like every writer that I read while I was writing this book. Actually, it was funny, you can kind of carbon date the books I was reading if you look at the very, very first draft. I didn't look at writers who were writing in their second language, but now that you mention it, that would have been a good thing to do. I did, funnily enough, look at some French translations of books I liked in English just to sort of see, like, the two languages, how they interact with each other. But then I think it was just looking at really good writing in English and just trying to hope that by osmosis, it would.
May I ask which books in English
Megan Abbott's books. I bought the French translations and just to see, because I know them so well, because I love her. And I love her books. So I think it was The Fever and maybe The End of Everything. And I bought the French translations and I just looked at, because also her prose is so particular that I was curious about how it would be rendered in French. And I think that helped me on a weird level, like just to see the two languages interact. Maybe it reinforced my confidence that the limit wasn't so, the border wasn't so impossible to cross.
It was also subtly, he said it was their third language, so if you're implying you should have a third language.
Oh.
Although you have Latin.
Hey,
Yeah.
I have Latin. Well, I speak a little, hablo un poco de español.
Paul, I'm one of those privileged readers who gets the private email that you send out, especially like marking the launch of this book. And in the most recent email, there was a very beautiful, very sinister drawing that you wanted on the cover of your book.
Yeah.
Why did you not end up procuring it?
So first, he's mentioning like I have a newsletter. Like if you go to my website, paultremblay.net,
It's good.
you can sign up for free, and I don't spam you. It's like once every 2 or 3 weeks. It was a beautiful piece of art that I think I didn't want to just say it in the newsletter because I'm not sure, but we think the artist might be dead because no one's really heard from this artist for a long time, and I think a parent runs their Instagram page, and their parent wasn't responding either. So. We also didn't want to harass them. If no one's going to answer, no one's going to answer. But no, I agree that that piece of work is just absolutely stunning. To the point where like I've never sent my publisher anything cover art related before, but like when I submitted the collection, I put it in with the cover page and like this, or if it's not this, it needs to have that feel to it. And I do love this cover. I mentioned this in the newsletter, but a sort of a fun quirk of life is that the designer is this guy named Brian Moore who went to college with my brother. And I played basketball with Brian. I knew he was a designer, but I had no idea that he was a William Morrow or HarperCollins until he got an email. It's like, hey, I'm doing your book. I'm like, all right, let's talk about it. But yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Other questions?
With horror, it's a lot of cause and effect. It's a bad event and what happens to people afterwards is for both of you. Do you think about the character's emotional response, or do you think of just their behavior and how it needs to carry on the plot?
Oh, definitely. I think I'm much more, I feel least comfortable with plot. Like I'm much more interested in the human reaction to it. And it's not true for every book of mine, but like, I'd say most of them, and I kind of think of it this way. For me, I feel like the biggest moment, I mean, there are other moments, but to me, the biggest moment comes at like the 2/3 point. I'm not going to speak in terms of acts because I hate that. And then I'm like really interested, okay, what's everyone going to do now? How are they going to act? How do they feel? To me, that's the part I'm really interested in.
Yeah, I think I work in a similar way. I always kind of struggle to figure out what's going to happen, but then, what's anyone feeling? Like, I love looking at that. And I see it when I'm watching TV also. Like, I've been watching The Sopranos recently for the first time, and I've got some fans in the house. I always get lost in terms of like who's doing a deal with who's going behind whose back. I don't care. But I'm like, Adriana, she feels so bad. Like, I love being in a character's head that way. So definitely emotions.
Right.
This is a question for Paul. So you write a lot of like metafictional stuff or experimental stuff. Like Paul Barron's Club is a memoir, but someone's writing in the margins.
Right.
There's a lot of biographical elements. And horror movie and novel you just mentioned is like a screenplay, but it's also a novel at the same time. So what do you find really fun about working in like metafictional stories? And do you have any advice for authors who are looking to do that sort of thing in their own work?
No.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the fun part is like, as a reader, I've always been like, really, I get a charge out of finding like a new narrative way to approach a story. It's not to say it has to happen for everything that I read, but like when it's done and done well, it gets me really excited. And novel-wise, for me, a great example is, Mark Danielewski's House of Leaves, or, to go back to Nabokov, Pale Fire. Stuff like that really excites me. So for me, the advice part of it is, if you think oh, I'm going to do this story through tweets, or I'm going to do it through Instagram posts, it could be a cool idea, but then the problem for me becomes, is that the only way I can tell the story? Like, I have to make it so it's thematically, it has to be there. My favorite example, I have no idea if the story works or not, but in my prior collection, Growing Things, there's a story called Notes from the Dog Walkers. And the story is told through literal, notes left by, someone who's walking an author's dog. And part is because, like, when we adopted our dog Holly, like in 2016, 2017, she was an older dog, and everyone's at work, kids are at school. It's like, oh, we can't leave her home all the time. We have to get dog walkers. So we had these strangers come into our house, walk Holly, and then leave these hilarious little notes, like, it was like a daycare note. It's like, oh, Holly was great today. She got extra belly scratches, poop, pee, check. And I would try to write fake notes to fool, to fool my family. Not even close to being fooled. I was like, oh, I have to write a note. I have to write a story using these notes from, the dog walkers. But, why would I ever do that? Or why would a story ever need to be told through that? And so that was actually another story that stuck around for a while because I didn't know what to do with it. I even tried to pawn it off on the brilliant Brian Evanson. It's like, we ended up doing a book for Concord Free Press. Has anyone ever heard of Concord Free Press? It's this really cool charity sort of publishing company. They print 3,000 books of whatever the book happens to be and then give those books away. If you get a book from them, you're supposed to make a donation. It's an honor system. So Brian Evans and I ended up putting out a book that was two novellas that were printed a long time ago but were hard to find. So, you could write to Concord Free Press and ask for a copy of Another Way to Fall. It's free. It's just then, now you have karma sitting on you that you have to make a donation. Anyway, so when Concord Free Press approached Brian, I'm like, hey Brian, let's write the story together. It's like going to be told through dog notes. And Brian's like, yeah, Paul, yeah. Well, we didn't. And that was John Langan doing Brian Evanson, by the way. John Langan does Brian Evanson's imitation as Owen Wilson for some reason. But I eventually found a reason as to why the story had to be told through notes. So, did I answer your question? Yeah. Sorry, I was really long and rambling. But I did mention my dog Holly.
Is she called Holly because of the Stephen King character? No.
When we adopted her, she came with the name Polly, but we thought that would be too confusing. Yeah.
Okay.
Mostly for me. So we just changed it to Holly.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
We have time for maybe a couple more questions, if anybody has any more. You don't have to. I can ask math questions though.
Yeah, I was just curious for the beast you are writing that and Freebirds. Were there any poets you looked to? Did you read any poets while you were writing this, or do you kind of try to stay focused on your own work?
I did read more poetry than I guess I would normally would, like W.S. Merwin. He's someone I really enjoy, so I read a bunch of his stuff. I did reread some of Seamus Heaney, right? Beowulf, but I also read some of Maria, I'm sorry, Maria, I'm going to butcher your name, but her recent translation of Beowulf. So, not a ton. I also reread Sharp Teeth that I mentioned as well before, jumping into that. So yeah, I did a little bit, but also like, I joked that's the freest of all possible verse. It's clearly it's sort of its own, I did want it to be sort of its own style, I guess. And it's not like, it's basically sentences broken up to look like poetry. Although my dad said, oh, I had to really slow down, it was hard to read. Put that on Goodreads, Dad. Thanks. One more? Any more? You don't have to. Oh, sure.
It's a question for both of you. So much of horror as a visual medium is relying on the jump scare, and some people consider it cheap, but it really does subtly in a lot of senses, and that's not something you can really achieve in a book. Like, you can't jump out at somebody, you can just close the book or read something else. Do you guys feel that you wish you could rely on that, or do you revel in other ways to scare someone at their own pace, basically?
Do you want to go first, or?
Okay, so as a thriller writer and reader, but also, horror reader as well, I read a book recently that had a jump scare in it, and it my blood chilled. It was The Trap by Catherine Ryan Howard. And I was like, oh my god, that's how you do it. And that scene, everyone's you'll see it referenced online, and it's it was really, it was the same impression as what happens on film. Personally, otherwise, I think in terms of, you can kind of pull off like, the page opens itself up to a sense of unease, like a fear that really sort of grows and tension rises. So I think there are ways to play with that stuff. You get tension, suspense, and then you can just throw in a really like scary little plot bit in there, like, oh, someone's coming back that isn't supposed to be there. Paul, you'll probably have a much better answer.
Not really. Although, I mean, I like one page has a pop-up thing out of it.
See,
My
that's much
publisher
better.
would-
That's
my publisher
good.
would destroy me. I mean, it's two different things. Like, I mean, they're two different mediums, obviously, and they're, you know, when I'm writing a book, like I'm not thinking movie. I want the book to be like, this is the best way to tell this story. I mean, maybe there's another way, but I try to make it, this is how it should be done. It's, you know, totally different effects and affects. Although I have to admit, like, I honestly never think about scares, because I think that's out of my control in a weird way. Like, because what scares is so subjective. Like, what scares you is different than what scares me. I think more what I can control is, you know, disturbing or maybe dread-inducing or just the emotional lives of the characters. So I never know if something's scary or not. You know, I hope it is, but also I'd be happier if it's just something that like sticks in your head, which I think books do a better job of than movies, or that's one of the affects that's different. I was very excited to hear Emma say that books are scaring her more than, like, she's been watching all these classic horror movies and other horror movies. I'm like, yeah, books.
Do you find that? Are you more scared by books or movies?
Well, I mean, as a kid, movies was always, like, I wasn't really a big reader as a kid until later, so, you know, movies in the moment, that visceral, you know, that stuff gets me nightmares, but like the books, I'll find myself thinking about them, and then I freak myself out. But like in the moment, like, movies will give me a nightmare, like Jaws or Freddy Krueger or something like that. When I was a kid, not now. No, not now.
No, at all. Well, before we wrap up, I actually have a request. Our agent asked to get a photo of the two of us
Oh, okay.
here.
Okay.
So no, just stay where you are.
Could someone take a photo of us on there? Please. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Was that?
Something with the crowd. Yeah, turn it around.
Oh, my God.
That's what he really wants.
That's what we're gonna take a selfie with the crowd.
Oh, yes. Again, I've been doing this. Well, okay, hold on. Okay, hold on.
Oh,
Well, I want one nice one too, the dining club.
Thank you.
that's all right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Brookline Booksmith. Thank you, Alex. I mean,
Yes,
this
thank
is
you so
wonderful.
much.
You know, please buy books from your indies, and don't use AI.